Welcome to another episode of the Student Loan Planner Podcast. I am Lauryn Williams, and I'm joined by my girl, Meagan McGuire. We are two student loan consultants that are helping people figure out their student loans in 60 minutes or less so that you can have clarity and feel really good about how to move forward with your student loans. Today, Meagan and I have decided to do a grab bag because there's been a lot of questions coming in our various Facebook groups. You might want to look to see if there's one that you want to join that is based on your profession. And we also just get questions in our inbox all the time from clients. So, Meagan, let's jump in. What are some of the recent questions we've been bumping into?
Woohoo. I love these types of episodes because I think we go through a lot of different topics in a short amount of time. May have been questions that you didn't even think to ask, or some of the elaboration that we have on some of these answers could help answer other questions that maybe you had, or just give you a broader understanding of student loan repayment in general. Federal student loans are the most complicated debts out there. So I think that those are some of the reasons why these are my favorite episodes. So one of the big questions, we've been getting a lot of questions actually, of course, which is to be expected, about this new revamped REPAYE plan, which this plan we've done a couple podcast episodes on already. We've got a ton of articles on our website about the proposed plan so far. So let's get into question number one, which I think we can elaborate on, Lauryn, on just a few different topics. With this new revamped REPAYE plan, what would be the forgiveness timeline if I have both undergraduate loans and graduate loans? Does this mean I would have a staggered forgiveness timeline and tax bomb? This is a great question because REPAYE, as it is today, is a 25-year plan to forgiveness if you have graduate loans at all. So undergrad and graduate loans, 25 years. If you just had undergraduate loans, it would be a 20-year timeline. The new revamped repayment plan, REPAYE, the proposal, there's going to be some differences what the payment's going to be, for one, because the undergraduate portion of the balance will be based off of 5% of discretionary income instead of 10%. So does that mean that the undergraduate loans get forgiven in 20 years instead of 25? And by the way the language is written, that's what it seems like. That is something that is to be determined. All of the stuff we talk about with this new REPAYE plan is kind of to be determined until there's that final stamp on it. But that's what it seems to suggest to us, that your undergraduate loans could have a shorter forgiveness timeline than your graduate loans. So this would mean you'd have two different forgiveness years and two different tax bomb timeframes. So tax bomb, that's the term we use for that big tax bill that you could get if you have a balance of your loans forgiven in the future. Because this is an IRS rule, not a student loan rule. But when a debt is forgiven, the IRS sees that as taxable to you as income in the year of forgiveness. So hypothetically, you would get a 1099 for that forgiven balance, and you'd have to pay taxes on it, income taxes on it. So that is something that we incorporate into our planning. We plan for that tax implication. But if this new revamped REPAYE plan comes out, that could mean that we need to be thinking about two separate tax bombs. So thoughts on that, Lauryn?
Definitely something that you want to be thinking about is whether or not you're going to end up on a staggered timeline. And then what does that look like for you? So what I've been suggesting to my clients is start saving up a little bit more so that you're ready for that first tax liability. And then 5 years later, it's probably going to be a much bigger tax liability at that point anyway. So you're already ahead of the game. You've got your savings and you're good to go. It's kind of hard for us to be able to calculate what exactly, because you've mixed your loans together. We've all done these consolidations. What is going to be the tax liability 20 years from now on 30,000-ish that has grown over time versus the other six-figure debt that you've taken on that is going to be forgiven over 25 years. But, we've asked our fearless leader, Travis, to come up with something, and he is the king of spreadsheets. So if anyone can come up with a way to do the calculation, it's him. But it's a pretty tough thing. So it's better to just kind of err on the side of caution, be conservative, and make sure you're ready to go at the 20-year mark. And then you can kick your feet up and relax for the last 5 years until your second set of loans get forgiven.
Yeah, that could be a proactive way to look at it. And we don't know if this is totally true. We also don't know if this tax implication is really going to exist in the future. I mean, it's currently waived until 2026. Could there be an extension of that? Maybe. Do they in the future decide that student loan forgiveness should not be taxable? Hopefully, but we don't want to count on that. We want to plan for a worst case scenario. So maybe saving a little bit more earlier on could be good, just so we have funds available for that first tax hit. But more on this to come. We'll definitely clear this up in the future once we know a little bit more about how this proposed plan will actually be implemented. So one other question we've been getting about this new REPAYE plan is how married filing separately conversations are going to change. Does it change the married filing separate conversation that we would have in consultations or that you should be thinking about as a client? And short answer to that is yes, it does. Because the existing REPAYE plan does not allow us to exclude spousal income, even if you file taxes separately. That existing repayment plan, REPAYE, always includes spousal income as part of the equation. But this new REPAYE plan is going to allow us to consider excluding spousal income if you look at filing separately. So that's going to make this conversation more relevant to more people who, may not have considered filing separately previously. And mathematically, it is kind of interesting and we've done the numbers on this with Travis's new kind of draft calculator, but it does seem like even if you and your spouse both have student loans, filing separately could make sense still, which sounds kind of confusing because you both have loans. It's going to be based off of your household income. If you file jointly, it'll be divided between the two of you by your balances weighted proportion. So why would I need to consider filing separately? Well, when you file separately, how they look at the discretionary income is they look at your household. So they take your adjusted gross income, so whatever your personal adjusted gross income was if you were filing separate, then they subtract the poverty line for your household size from that adjusted gross income. Your household size can include your children. This is very relevant if you are a married student loan borrower and your spouse also has student loans and you have children, because you can count your kids essentially twice if you're filing separately, because you have a family size of yourself and your kiddos, and your spouse has a family size of themselves and the kiddos. So you're kind of counting the kids twice, if that makes sense. So if you're filing jointly, they're only counting the family size once. They're counting you, your spouse, and your kids. But I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely, Megan. And I think this speaks to, the complexity if someone did get a little bit lost that exists with the new plan. So we thought that everything was going to be made a lot simpler, and it's definitely not simpler, which is where the consultations become really, really valuable. It's like, help me sort through what this means for me and my particular situation. But yeah, absolutely. I think you explained it really well. And I think it's a good segue into the second question that I'll pull from the grab bag, which is you mentioned that you don't have to turn in a tax return for them to calculate your payment. What other options are there? And so because you were just talking about married filing separately, this person is asking like, hey, well, if I don't have to turn in my tax return, like what else can I do? And we talk frequently about alternative documentation. And so to your point, Megan, the new REPAYE plan may allow married filing separately. That's what we're hearing. But the current REPAYE plan does not. And so, to be really clear, I want to read exact language about like how the married filing separately works and why you can't do it on the current REPAYE. So it says, only the individual income will be used to calculate your monthly payment if you are separated from your spouse or you're unable to reasonably access your spouse's income. It does not say that you can just do married filing separately when it relates to REPAYE. And then it even goes on to say, this is from studentaid.gov, if you filed your return jointly, you can provide alternative documentation. This is only if you are unable to reasonably access your spouse's income. We get this all the time where people are trying to do this process and skip the married filing separately piece of the puzzle. There has to be one of these extenuating circumstances where you're separated or you're unable to reasonably access your spouse's income. And in that case, you can do that. And if you've already filed separately with it from the spouse because you're, in some sort of situation, then you can, use your tax return. But alternative documentation, is something such as a pay stub. And that's the key piece of the puzzle. So like, how can you do this if you do married filing separately? It may not be that your tax return is a real accurate depiction of your real financial situation, in which case you would want to provide something other than your tax return. And that is something like a pay stub, which the follow-up question I always get to that is like, well, what if I'm an entrepreneur and I don't have a pay stub? Well, there are various types of letters that you can turn in. There are other ways that your servicer will allow you to submit income, but ultimately it is going to be up to your servicer to tell you what they will accept as alternative documentation.
Yeah. So just to kind of hone in on a point too, like not having access to your spouse's income. We've talked a little bit about our opinions on this too in articles on the website and in previous podcast episodes. But, if you have a joint checking account or savings account with your spouse, you reasonably have access to your spouse's income. This language is more so if you are going through a separation, you're on the verge of divorce, you are in an abusive relationship situation, your spouse is incarcerated, like you legitimately cannot access your spouse's income. That is when that can be used. So you have to be careful about that. It's not just, oh, well, I didn't ask for it. No, that's not fitting that definition. And that could get you into some trouble down the road.
Yeah, you're exactly right, Megan, in that regard. Like I said, a lot of times people are trying to this language isn't really clear. I'm going to go off and do this thing. It's like, you don't want to end up in a situation where you're audited, because there is an auditing process for student loans as well, just like the IRS does. Like, you could squeak by cheating on your taxes, but you could also get in a lot of trouble if you're audited.
Yeah, but why risk it? Yeah.
Exactly. Why risk it? And to that point, we didn't talk a lot about the pay-as-you-earn income-based or income contingent repayment plans, because they also have rules in place. And so it's the same situation. It's not different. You must be separated from your spouse or unable to access their income, and you must do married filing separately as a prerequisite to being able to submit alternative documentation. So do keep that in mind.
Yeah, I think I get the question too towards, starting this conversation is, if I am going to be using alternative documentation, then they kind of go back to the front of the conversation. Like, well, then do I even have to file separately? Can I just use alternative documentation? And it's like, no. These are all prerequisites. You have to, you have to file separately. Then you could potentially use alternative documentation if you would like, if necessary. But you can't scoot past filing separately to exclude spousal income. That is the only way you can do that. If you are, living with your spouse, sleeping next to your spouse, share bank accounts with your spouse, whatever it is. Like if y'all are in reasonable contact, that is the rule. Okay, so on to the next question.
All right, let me go in the bag. It's a virtual bag, everyone, just for FYI.
It's a Google document.
Why does it feel like I'm the only one who never stopped making payments on my loans? Oh my goodness. This is going to be my favorite question. I'm sure of it, because it gives us the opportunity to be able to help a lot of people. But it also hurts my soul that we are still answering this question. So yeah, if you are still paying your loans despite the COVID pause, it is because you have FFEL loans, and not just any kind of FFEL loans, but privately held FFEL loans. And you are one of those people who's been making payments since COVID. So the FFEL loans are a little bit different than the direct loans, which most people have. One piece of the puzzle is that FFEL loans stopped existing as of 2010, and they only started to issue direct loans at that time. So who has FFEL loans? Clearly, people who borrowed before 2010. And if we just kind of think about this from an overall perspective, I am turning 40 this year, and I graduated in 2004. So what we have like 5 years left, or 6 years until 2010. So the people that are 5 years younger than me are kind of the young bunch that might have FFEL loans. The young bunch is 35 years old. What does that mean about the old bunch? They're much older than 35 years old. So let me tell you about like who I'm talking about when I say this. FFEL loans, despite all the different things that are out there right now and us shouting it from the rooftops on a regular basis, are not loans that are productive to have anymore. So there's this thing called the income-driven repayment waiver where you can consolidate these loans. You would stop paying them like everybody else, get access to the COVID forbearance, but more importantly, your payments are going to get counted toward the IDR waiver. You're not going to lose all the payment count that you've had in the past. There's literally not a reason to not be consolidating these loans right now. Megan, can you think of a reason that anybody should not consolidate their FFEL loans?
No, I was trying to think back to some other situation where, the biggest reason why we wouldn't have done this in the past was because it would have erased payment history. And if someone had these types of loans for a really long time, they may be trapped on income-based repayment because that's the only income-driven plan that those types of loans have access to. But at least, we wouldn't have lost all that payment history at the time. But now that is different. The IDR waiver really, knocks down that downside to consolidating because we retain that payment history that can go towards that forgiveness timeline. So really thinking about just every kind of scenario, maybe the only reason that I can think of at this point with where things are going in the student loan world is if you're someone who doesn't have a ton of history, like maybe you borrowed 2007, 2008, 2009, that was pretty much it. It's a pretty small balance that's left and you have a really low interest rate. That might be the only reason I can think of why you might not want to consolidate those FFEL loans. Because when you have those FFEL loans, sometimes they carry an interest rate discount for a certain number of on-time payments. You may lose it if you were to consolidate, and consolidation would be beneficial to you to have access to cheaper repayment plans. But if that's not really your goal with those loans anymore, you're not trying to be on an income-driven plan, you're just trying to pay them off efficiently very soon, in the next few years, then maybe reserving the loan as it is with its lower interest rate is advisable. And then maybe one other scenario. Well, no, I don't think this would be a scenario. This would just be a fact that, there might be one hesitation of consolidation because you have to update your income. And let's say, your income has increased pretty dramatically since the last time you've recertified. And so consolidating now would make you have to update your income sooner than your original anniversary coming up. Well, that might just be a factor to consider, a cost of getting the loans converted into a better type of loan that's for the greater good. There's probably a bigger, longer term benefit to doing that consolidation than the short sting of having those slightly higher payments earlier, if that makes sense. Those are the one main reason why maybe I could see someone not consolidating FFEL loans right now. And then one other kind of initial thought that might make someone hesitate that we can hopefully get over with that conversation, because the greater good, the longer term benefits of having federally held direct loans will, I think, outweigh the smaller sting of the payments being higher sooner.
All right, so we came up with 2, maybe 1.5 reasons.
1.5, yeah.
Right. Because generally, if you have the privately held FFEL loans, you've been recertifying every year anyway. So the lower income is just maybe last year's income versus this year's income. But, like I said, to someone, that's going to make a difference, especially if their income climbed dramatically over the course of the year. But still, the benefits are likely to outweigh the rewards. Yet and still, there are 3.84 million people that still have this kind of debt as of December of 2022. 3.8 million, Megan. We are out here fighting a good fight. I think we've done how many student loan consultations have we done as a team at this point?
As a company, we're over 10,127.
So we have done over 10,000 consultations as a team, and we are out here fighting the good fight. But you can see right out the gate why we exist as student loan planner, because 3.8 million people don't have the right kind of loans right now. They are not doing what is in their best interest. Despite the pause and the payment freeze and all the different things that are happening, these people could benefit from a consultation. Absolutely. 100%. And it's not just 3.8 million people. Their debt, wait for it, makes up $103 billion of student loan debt. I am just like appalled. Like, I wake up every day super excited to be able to do this work. And I'm like, hello out there. Come get help, please. So if you know someone that is a little bit older, like I said, 35 or older at this point.
Not even old.
But I imagine the ones that make up that 3.8 billion are some people who borrowed quite a bit a while ago. And they're not the type to maybe listen to the podcast. They're not very tech savvy. So they're not going online and reading blogs about student loans. So, think about somebody who you have not talked about finances with that might be a little bit older or less tech savvy or just kind of live under a rock, and mention this to them, because this could absolutely be huge savings and a great benefit to them to, jump in, do a consolidation, take advantage of that IDR waiver, and get their student loan situation figured out.
Mm-hmm. What is maybe a kind of scary, sneaky thing about that many people still having these types of loans is I do think there is a large portion of those people who are in default status. And with those types of loans in default, it's possible that you have fallen off of course, you've fallen off your payment schedule. So it may seem like you don't have payments right now. So it may seem like you don't have to pay attention to this warning. But you would really want to make sure you can check what loan types that you have by taking a look at your studentaid.gov account. You log in, you'll see your loan balance right front and center on the dashboard, and you can click on view loan details. It'll make a list of your loans, and ideally all of your loan types are direct loans. Again, there's less and less reasons, almost no reasons to be carrying an FFEL loan anymore. If you have a combination of direct loans and FFEL loans, there may be reasons to consolidate the FFEL loans by themselves. There may be reasons to consolidate them all together. That is a careful consideration that you would need to make, and something that I would suggest a consultation for if you have a combination. That's how you could check. And that's also how you can check to see if the loans are in good standing or not. It is normal if they are in forbearance right now. Forbearance is because of the national COVID forbearance environment that we've been in. It is not normal to have your studentaid.gov portal show that you're in default status or in collections or with the default resolution group. That is not a normal thing. So that is something that you definitely want to address. There's ways that you can do that pretty quickly. You can consider a consolidation out of default. That's a pretty quick way to go about it. You could do a loan rehab program, but that's not even necessary anymore because of this Operation Fresh Start that is new and available. You just have to call the default resolution group. Their phone number is 1-800-621-3115. You can reach out to them and inquire about the Operation Fresh Start. That is an option, or consolidation out of default is an option. So definitely take a look at that. That is something that definitely needs to be addressed. Federal student loans, they have extraordinary collection authority where they can garnish wages, they can garnish your tax returns. It is not a good position to be in if you're in default with a federal student loan balance, even if it's a commercially held balance, because they could still come after you. So this is something to definitely address, and also a way that you could just check to make sure everything looks good. You don't have any of those FFEL loans, so you could have peace of mind and knowing that you are set.
All right, I think we covered the FFEL question. Hopefully, we are able to help at least just one or two people. I'd love to be able to help 3.8 million or 3.84 million. I said, the more you share this podcast, the better a chance we will have. But I would take just one or two people reaching out and saying like, hey, we heard this, and because of it, we'd be able to help them. So let's move on. What else does the grab bag have for us, Megan?
Let's see. So we have a Parent Plus loan question. I have multiple children in school still. One's graduated. We're in this COVID forbearance. How do I go about the double consolidation on timing? This is a tricky question. And this is something that does take a lot of planning, because as a Parent Plus loan borrower, you borrow each time your child is going to school, which, if you have 3 kids, that could be over the course of, 12 years or longer, depending on what their age difference is,
Right. You might have the oops kid.
Yeah. If you are in the midst of borrowing Parent Plus loans, but you've heard about this double consolidation, just a refresh, it is the only way to get access to these cheaper income-driven plans like REPAYE and PAYE and IBR. Otherwise, they just have access to fixed payoff plans and a plan called income contingent repayment, which is based on 20% of discretionary income. So this double consolidation loophole is a loophole. It could be closed at any time. We have no idea if this will exist in the future or if the ability to do this is going to exist in the future. But we do know that the new revamped repayment plan, REPAYE, the proposal does not include Parent Plus loans in it. So we also know that things aren't getting better for Parent Plus loans. So how do you go about that when you have kids that are in school? You're going to need to rely on the double consolidation, but you don't have all the loans borrowed yet. So this comes down to a risk kind of conversation on what your risk tolerance is. You could wait until all the kids are done with school. The risk there is that this loophole is closed by that time, and you only have access to income contingent repayment or the fixed repayment options. That could be a reality, a risk that you'd have to be okay with. If that is not something that you feel comfortable with, then it could make sense to do the double consolidation in batches. This could be tricky. You may not necessarily want to do this every year, definitely not every semester. That would be a very exhausting process. But maybe every year you look at this, or every child you look at this, you pause and you do the double consolidation for every child. So this is a strategy that does need to be carefully mapped out. And this is what we do on consultations all the time, is figuring out, what should be the strategic timing of this? When can you start this process? What can you do to kind of put your foot in the door to have loans ready for the double consolidation without actually finishing it quite yet? So I've had many conversations like that where we start, one consolidation for one portion of the loans. We do another consolidation later, 6 months later when more loans are borrowed. And we have those two consolidations kind of sitting there ready to be consolidated if we had to do it immediately. But we kind of wait, so there's a lot of like timing that goes into that to answer that question. But there are options. I think the riskiest thing to do would be to wait to do anything until all the loans are borrowed. But, you could kind of pace your time with putting a strategy together and keep your foot in the door for as much as you can for the double consolidation.
Yeah, Megan and I did an episode to close out the year to talk deeply about student loans. So if you're a Parent Plus borrower, you might want to go back to that episode and see what other little nuggets might be relevant to you. But you're right. Ultimately, it depends. And it's really, really important that you come up with a strategy that is based on your individual situation.
Yeah, that is what's so tough about student loan planning in general, too, is like, I would love to be able to say, hey, this applies to, everyone who's listening to this. There's not a cookie cutter plan for student loans. There's timing that's involved. There's a bunch of numbers with income and, working years and income trajectory and balance. I mean, there's just so many things that go into crafting your plan, which sounds overwhelming, but it really is a good opportunity to just make sure we have the right plan catered to you. I think that's a positive. Is there might be a lot of options and a lot of complexity with student loan planning, but that's a good thing. That means we have a lot of options that we can consider and a plan that we can really craft around your financial situation.
Yes, yes, yes. All right, let's move on to, this is a question about document preparation companies. Megan, we both loathe these doc prep companies, but I'll let you ask the question and tell us what you think a little bit.
Okay, yes. So document prep companies. These types of companies out there advertise themselves as sometimes like student loan forgiveness associates or student loan. Usually it has something to do, like forgiveness is sometimes in the title. The one that was part of this question was National Student Debt Forgiveness Center. So again, forgiveness it seems to always be in the title. which is kind of frustrating.
And they make it sound kind of official. It's like, there's a lot of words in it, but kind of sounds like it could be a real thing. And maybe I should take them seriously. Like, no, you should not.
No, every time I take a look at these companies or I speak with someone who is fallen victim to these types of companies, there's a common trend on certain things that you'll experience. One is there are some high pressure tactics to get you to sign up with them or to pay them to do your document prep. You know, you might have an introduction conversation with someone with this company to ask questions. They tell you about their program. And then there's a very high pressure sales tactic or tactics taken to try to get you to sign up right then and there. And usually it's a monthly fee, a pretty expensive monthly fee, or an annual charge that they present to you. And they sell it by telling you that, oh, this stuff is so complicated, you're never going to figure it out. You're going to do something wrong and it's going to not get processed correctly. Let us, the professionals, do the paperwork for you. So there's a lot of things that are problematic with that. First, you could do the paperwork for free yourself, and you should be doing the paperwork yourself because this is your personal information. This is not like tax document prep, guys. This is not the same. This is, basic information that you're filling in, like your name, your address, your social security number, your phone number. Usually that's the personal information that's involved. And then depending on what you're doing, just maybe information about your job. If you're working towards public service loan forgiveness, could be information about which repayment plan you're choosing if you want to go on a repayment plan. So again, these are things that you could do for free. You do not need to pay someone to maintenance your plan in any form or fashion because this paperwork is usually submitted once or once a year if it's an income recertification. And your servicer reaches out to you when you have to recertify. So that's a notification that you get. You could also see this in your studentaid.gov portal. So you can be aware of your loan situation, just like you're aware enough to pay your credit card bill or your auto loan or those types of things. You'll be aware of due dates. Some of those things just, they're frustrating to me because they scare you out of thinking that you can handle this on your own. You can handle a lot of the things that they would do for you on your own. I don't think this is the same as student loan planning, like doing, really mapping out a plan and making sure it fits within your financial goals and your own financial plan. That's different. That is planning. Document prep is very transactional. It can be done for free. And there's a lot of tutorials on our website that you can look at on our blog for free that help kind of walk you through it. Anything you want to add to that? I think I'm going on a rant.
Nope, I think you covered it well. The big piece of the puzzle is that this is not a service that is worth paying for. And while there are a lot of different convenience things out there, this is not one that you generally are going to end up being happy with and feeling like you got the value out of it. So absolutely want to avoid doc prep companies, especially when they're, like you said, taking advantage of you, trying to sound very official right out the gate. And like you said, something that has like a monthly service fee related to it. Like, you don't fill out documents monthly related to your student loan. So run the other direction.
Right. Yeah. And I think you put it perfectly. Like, they're not providing value for that amount of money. Like, they're not doing anything that you couldn't have done on your own, truly, at the end of the day.
All right. So moving on, we just got two more that we're going to pull out the grab bag for you all. And one is related to this kind of crazy work environment that we have right now. Someone reached out to me recently and told me that they just got laid off, and they asked what they should be doing in light of the fact that they just got laid off with their student loan. So, how does their student loan plan change because they are out of income right now? And it's a really tough, like I said, work environment for so many people. We've seen all the big tech companies do like some massive layoffs. The one that's most recently around the time of this podcast is Spotify. They got rid of 600 employees, which is a pretty significant number of people who are now without work and having to figure out like what to do. But as we think about student loan strategies, what you can do is recertify your income. So because of COVID, no one's had to recertify their income. Their income is really low in general from 2019 or 2018 even. We are now in 2023. So our general advice has always been to not recertify your income. But there are some extenuating circumstances when you absolutely want to do that. And a layoff is a good time to do that. Why? Because you legitimately have $0 of income. So recertifying is going to give you $0 payments when payments do pick back up, which is going to be at some point this year. So assuming that you're going for some sort of income-driven repayment forgiveness, you would definitely want to maximize your ability to have a low payment until the next time you need to recertify, instead of your payment picking up where it left off, which is likely higher than zero. So if you've been laid off, one of the saving graces is that your student loan payment can go to zero.
It's a great point coming into a year where we're probably going to have to be paying these loans very soon, and factoring that student loan payment into your budget, knowing what it's going to look like. This is a great time to readjust what that income-driven payment's going to be if there's been changes in your financial life, so that there is an opportunity to do that, thankfully. Great. Now, another question from the grab bag, and I think this will be our last, unless we see any other quick ones. Refunds for PSLF. This is the question. Mohila has told me that I have 138 payments qualified towards PSLF. Does this mean I get a refund? So short answer is probably not, because it seems as if you may have hit 138 payments with the help of this COVID forbearance. We've been in this COVID forbearance since March of 2020. And we need 120 payments to get to public service loan forgiveness. You are 18 payments over that. And we've been in this COVID forbearance for almost 36 months. So there's nothing to be refunded, is what I'm saying there, unless you did, in fact, make payments during this forbearance timeframe. If you did, then yes, you could be getting a refund. And I actually get this question a lot also in regards to FFEL loans, if they're eligible for a refund. And if they were commercially held FFEL loans, no. You may have been able to get PSLF through the PSLF waiver, which is great. But if you had to consolidate those commercially held FFEL loans to do so, that payment history, while they were commercially held FFEL loans, is not going to be eligible for any kind of refund. But if you made any payments on the direct loans after you reached 120 payments, then yes, that's when you would be eligible. Interesting, this may not be super relevant, but there are a small amount of people that may have federally held FFEL loans. Very small percentage of people, I'm thinking. These folks could be eligible for a refund during this COVID forbearance. I actually had a case recently where this was the case, where I had to look at their file a couple of times. Like, what? These aren't commercially held FFEL? But they weren't. They were, in fact, federally held FFEL loans, and they weren't going towards PSLF, so we didn't need to have that conversation about the PSLF waiver or anything. But it was something where we were looking at a cheaper income-driven plan option for them. The IDR waiver, I think, would have been relevant. FFEL loans still, even if they're federally held, only have access to IBR. So we decided to do that consolidation, but they had been paying over the COVID forbearance when they could have just gone into forbearance. So thankfully, they were able to get a refund. Kind of rare. Have you had any of those types of cases that you could think of?
I have not. That is a pretty rare one, but excellent example. That's why it's so important. Like you said, we talked about the 3.8 million people earlier. Despite all the different options out there to share this information, studentaid.gov has done a much better job during COVID of disseminating information and cleaning up their website so it's easier to read. There's information that's just falling through the cracks for people. And, sometimes you get to be the bearer of really good news. Like, hey, go get your money back. Somebody, I think the highest amount that I've had refunded was close to $200,000. This guy was hammering his loans. And it did, even with that amount that having been paid over the last 2.5 years, it still did not make financial sense for him to continue to pay. And we told him to go get a refund.
Wow.
And he did get his refund. Woo.
Yeah.
Like, what a dance. That's like retiring a whole year earlier. Like a few years earlier in some people's situation. Like,
Yeah. And we've been told, or we've started to see clients, and if you have a different story, let us know. But as far as how the refunds are issued, it seems like they're sending this refund in one of two ways. They're either sending it back to the same method of payment that you had paid those payments with. So if you were on like a direct debit situation, it will be refunded back to that checking account. If you may not have had billing information, like auto pay information set up, then they're going to be sending you checks. And I literally saw a couple of pictures of clients and people in our Facebook group that took a picture of a stack of checks from every month of the eligible months that they were getting refunded. And I was like, oh my goodness, it's going to take a while to, take pictures of those or take those to the teller.
right. Yeah. Not the most efficient process on the government's part, but hey,
No.
as long as you get your money back.
Yeah. So it could be one of two ways. So if you're eligible for a refund, or if you're someone who's pursuing loan forgiveness and you're realizing you had made a payment or payments since March 13th of 2020, it's not too late to go back and get a refund. You can go ahead and do that. You can initiate that refund by calling your student loan servicer. If you're a PSLF person and PSLF, the MOHELA system has confirmed you've made over the required 120 payments and you're due a refund because you paid, maybe you got there before the COVID forbearance kicked in, then they would be issuing you a refund check or a direct deposit as well. So hopefully that's helpful for some folks who are wondering about that. And if you have had a different experience, let us know, and we'll be able to share with future folks to help them know what to expect too.
Yeah, absolutely. Sharing is caring in that regard. So frequently we get some of the information. So, we're reading studentaid.gov on a daily basis, like reading all the different media outlets and things to see if there's any kind of hidden information that we don't know about. But a lot of the information that we get that's helpful comes from clients directly and what they're experiencing. So don't be afraid to reach out. One thing I was thinking about as you were talking about that, Meagan, is like if you maybe had something on auto pay and you were expecting, it might go back to that account and you've closed that account. You want to be mindful of that as well. Like, hopefully they would send you a check, but they might also just try to send it to that account and then it never come. And then you got to troubleshoot it. So if you already know you're in that situation, it may be something where you want to reach out and get ahead of it so that your payment isn't further delayed getting your refund. Because I've seen a lot of clients, especially recently with the interest rate changes, bouncing around to different banks. Trying to, chase various interest rates and change.
Like savings.
Exactly. Savings, checking.
Yeah, savings account
exactly.
interest rates.
So just be mindful of that.
Makes sense. Okay. Sweet. Any last minute questions you think we should throw in or grab out from the grab bag?
I feel like we covered it for now. Like you said, things are always coming up. We're trying to bring you all the new and the latest all the time. So hopefully this information is relevant, like I said, to you or someone you know, because that's a key piece of the puzzle is sometimes it's like, oh, this didn't really help me. But there's someone that you know that could probably be helped by this information. So sharing is caring. Don't be afraid to send this podcast on to someone else or just share what you learned today.
Awesome. Well, great. Looking back at our history, I think we've done these kind of grab bag podcast episodes maybe once a month or once every couple months. We'll probably continue to do them because there's just so many questions that come to our inbox that we feel like the masses could benefit from hearing. And we may touch on pieces of the question in our podcast episodes, but maybe we don't really get into the meat of it or the nitty gritty details like we could if we were directly answering a question. So if you have questions, post them in our Facebook groups or send them to help@studentloanplanner.com. We'd love to just see what's on your minds or what you're seeing out in the field. And we'll share on our end too to help more people tackle their student loan situation. So we are in this together.
All right. Until next time, good people.